Normandy, July 1944. While American GIs paraded their semi-automatic Garands and officers demanded modern weaponry, Sergeant William Thornton polished his Lee-Enfield No. 4 MK Westo, a rifle design dating back to 1895. Staff officers called it obsolete. His own platoon joked it belonged in a museum. Then German counteroffensives stalled the Allied advance, and enemy officers coordinated devastating ambushes with impunity. In 6 days, Thornton's antique would silence 23 of them, changing battlefield doctrine forever. The rain hammered against the canvas tent at Hill 112, 3 miles south of Caen, at 0400 hours on July 10, 1944. Sergeant William Thornton, 34, from Blackburn, Lancashire, sat on an ammunition crate, methodically cleaning his Lee-Enfield No. 4 Meki. The rifle's worn wooden stock bore scratches from North Africa, Sicily, and now Normandy. Around him, the 2nd Battalion argued about modern weaponry, whilst the sharp smell of cordite and wet earth filled the command post. "That relic should be in the Imperial War Museum, Thornton," Captain Geoffrey Harris remarked, gesturing with his Webley revolver. "The Americans have Garands, 8 rounds, semi-automatic. You're still working a bolt action like it's the Somme." Thornton didn't look up from his weapon. "Sir, the Lee-Enfield has a 10-round magazine. I can fire 30 aimed rounds per minute. That Garand gives them 8 shots before a distinctive ping tells every Jerry within 200 yards they're reloading. Sentiment won't win battles, Sergeant. Neither will blind faith in shiny metal, sir." The strategic situation was deteriorating rapidly. Operation Epsom had stalled. British and Canadian forces were bogged down in Norman hedgerows, ancient earthen walls topped with thick vegetation that transformed every field into a fortress. German defenders, particularly SS panzer divisions, had established devastating defensive positions. British casualties were mounting, 4,020 men lost in 5 days, with another 8,000 wounded. The advance that should have taken Caen within days had become a grinding attrition that Churchill privately called another Western Front. But the most critical problem wasn't German defensive positions, it was their command structure. German officers, particularly those from elite SS divisions, were coordinating defensive maneuvers with tactical brilliance. They moved between hedgerow positions in broad daylight, apparently confident that British snipers couldn't reach them at distances beyond 400 yards. Radio intercepts showed they were right to be confident. British counter-sniper operations had eliminated only 11 enemy marksmen in 3 weeks, while suffering 27 casualties of their own. German officers conducted briefings in open farmyards, directed mortar fire from exposed church towers, and moved between positions with minimal security. Their arrogance was justified by results. British attacks were being predicted, countered, and devastated before they properly began. Thornton had seen the pattern developing. A lance corporal from his own company, Peter Wells from Cardiff, had been killed by a German machine gun nest that somehow knew exactly when and where the platoon would attack. 3 days later, an entire section was annihilated by pre-sighted mortar fire. The intelligence leak wasn't from British lines. It was from German officers who observed British preparations through binoculars from elevated positions, then calmly walked to communication posts to coordinate responses. "We need those officers eliminated," Major Robert Ashford stated flatly during the command briefing. He spread aerial reconnaissance photographs across the map table. "German defensive coordination is too precise. They're observing our deployments, directing counterfire, and withdrawing units before we can engage. Until we disrupt their command structure, every attack will fail." "Counter-battery fire," Harris suggested. "Artillery's too imprecise. They relocate before shells land. We need precision elimination of specific individuals directing defensive operations." "Our sniper teams have been ineffective, sir," Harris noted. "The distances are too great. Most German officers stay beyond 400 yards, maximum effective range for most marksmen under battlefield conditions." Ashford's gaze settled on Thornton. "I'm told you qualified as a marksman at Bisley before the war, 600 yards, consistently." 700, sir. In 1938 King's Prize competition. That was peacetime competition shooting, Sergeant. Clean rifle, calm conditions, stationary targets. This is combat, mud, rain, exhaustion, targets that shoot back. The rifle's the same, sir. So am I. The room fell silent. Other officers exchanged skeptical glances. The proposal seemed desperate. Sending one man with an obsolete bolt-action rifle against the German officer corps. But desperation was becoming standard procedure. British forces had suffered 80,000 casualties since D-Day, far beyond projections. If the German command structure remained intact, the entire Normandy campaign risked becoming a bloodbath that would dwarf the Somme. "You'd be operating independently," Ashford continued. "No spotter, no support team. German positions are too fluid for us to provide real-time intelligence. You'd need to identify targets, calculate range, compensate for wind and elevation, and engage before their security details respond. Most importantly, you'd need to do it repeatedly. One dead officer means nothing. They'll replace him within hours. But systematic elimination of their command structure over sustained period, that might actually disrupt their coordination." Thornton set his rifle down carefully. The worn wood and blued steel seemed suddenly heavier. 23 years he'd been shooting, since his father taught him to hunt grouse on Lancashire moors. But those were birds. The targets Major Ashford described wore uniforms, commanded men, had families waiting in Germany. "How long would this operation continue, sir?" "Until German defensive coordination collapses, or until you're killed, whichever comes first." Rain drummed harder against the tent. Somewhere in the darkness, artillery rumbled. Thornton thought of Lance Corporal Wells from Cardiff, barely 19, his body torn apart by machine gun fire because some German officer had calmly observed British deployments and directed the ambush. He thought of the 300 men in his battalion who wouldn't see home because German officers coordinated killing zones with methodical efficiency. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow morning, 05:30 hours, before the Germans have finished breakfast." The Norman dawn arrived grey and cold at 05:15 hours on July 11th. Thornton moved through hedgerows alone, the Lee-Enfield slung across his back, 50 rounds of .303 ammunition distributed in pouches across his webbing. The rifle weighed 9 pounds. With ammunition, scope and survival kit, his total load approached 45 pounds. Every step through waterlogged fields sucked at his boots. The temperature hovered at 12 degrees Celsius, cold enough to make fingers stiff, not cold enough to freeze the mud that caked everything. The operational reality was brutal. Thornton had no radio. Transmission would reveal his position. No spotter. Another man meant double the detection risk. No prepared positions. German patrols swept the area constantly. He would need to find elevated observation points, identify officer targets at ranges exceeding 600 yards, calculate ballistic solutions in his head, and fire before German security troops located him. Then he would need to relocate immediately. Because German counter-sniper doctrine was efficient, triangulate the shot, saturate the area with mortar fire within 90 seconds, send infantry to confirm the kill. The equipment challenges were equally severe. Modern sniper rifles in 1944 were specialist weapons, accurized actions, match-grade barrels, precision optics. Thornton's Lee-Enfield was a standard infantry rifle manufactured in 1942 at ROF Fazakerley near Liverpool. The only modification was a number 32 MKI telescopic sight, a basic 3x magnification scope that had seen hard service across North Africa. The scope's adjustments were imprecise, its optics fogged in damp conditions, its mounting system was prone to shifting after sustained use. By modern sniper standards, it was hopelessly inadequate. By 1944 standards, it was what you got. The environmental conditions were hostile. Normandy in July meant intermittent rain, heavy morning fog, wind gusts from 15 to 25 miles per hour, and visibility that ranged from 600 yards on clear days to 50 yards during rain squalls. Ballistic calculations that were straightforward on Bisley's shooting ranges became nightmare mathematics under combat conditions. A 15-mile-per-hour crosswind would deflect a .303 round approximately 18 inches at 600 yards. But the wind wasn't constant. It gusted, swirled around hedgerows, created turbulence that changed by the second. Temperature affected powder burn rates, humidity affected trajectory, even the rifle's barrel temperature altered point of impact after successive shots. Then there was the human factor. Thornton hadn't slept properly in 4 days. British infantry operated on rotating 4-hour sleep schedules, constantly interrupted by stand-to alerts, German probing attacks, and the general chaos of frontline existence. Food was tinned corned beef, hard biscuits, and lukewarm tea when field kitchens could reach forward positions. The psychological weight was crushing, knowing that every target was a human being, that the German officers directing defensive operations were doing their duty exactly as he was doing his, that killing them was murder dressed up as military necessity. At 6:47 hours, Thornton reached his first position, the bombed-out upper floor of a farmhouse overlooking the village of Esquay. German forces held the village, approximately 120 infantry with supporting weapons. Through his scope, he observed their morning routine, soldiers collecting water from the village well, NCOs distributing rations, machine gun crews testing weapons, and there, standing beside a Kübelwagen, 2 officers conferring over a map. Range, approximately 580 yards. Wind, gusting from the west at estimated 18 miles per hour. Temperature, warming to 15 degrees. The officers wore standard Wehrmacht Feldgrau uniforms, no identifying insignia visible at this range, but their bearing, their position, their confident gestures marked them as company or battalion command staff. Thornton's hands trembled, not from fear, from exhaustion, cold, and the moral weight of what he was about to do. The Lee-Enfield's bolt was stiff. He worked it slowly, chambering around with painful deliberation to avoid noise. The .303 cartridge seated with a barely audible click. He exhaled slowly, settling the rifle's stock against his shoulder, feeling the familiar wood against his cheek. The scope's reticle danced across the target. Gusting wind made steady aim impossible. Thornton forced his breathing to slow. 4 seconds in, hold. 6 seconds out, hold. His heart rate decreased. The reticle's movement reduced from wild swings to manageable oscillation. He estimated windage, 18 inches right to compensate for western wind. Elevation, approximately 30 inches above point of aim to compensate for bullet drop at 580 yards. The first officer gestured toward British lines. Directing observation, probably coordinating the defensive response that would kill British soldiers when they attacked at 0900 hours. Thornton centered the reticle, held his breath, and squeezed. The Lee-Enfield roared. The rifle's recoil drove back against his shoulder. Through the scope, he saw the officer collapse. The second officer froze for critical seconds. Enough time for Thornton to work the bolt, chamber the second round, reacquire target, and fire again. The second officer fell beside the first. Chaos erupted in Esquay. German infantry scattered, searching for the sniper's position. Thornton was already moving, descending the farmhouse stairs 3 at a time, exiting through the back wall's collapsed section, running hunched through hedgerows as German mortar fire began impacting the farmhouse. 90 seconds, exactly as doctrine predicted. The day continued in similar pattern. Move to observation position, identify targets, calculate ballistics, fire, relocate before counterfire arrived. At 10:15 hours, he eliminated a German artillery observer directing fire onto British positions, range 620 yards, single shot through the chest. At 13:47 hours, an SS officer coordinating counterattack was dropped at 595 yards. At 16:53 hours, two Wehrmacht captains conferring near a hedgerow junction, both eliminated with consecutive shots before German security could respond. By nightfall, Thornton had fired 19 rounds, 7 officers dead, confirmed by observing German casualties being evacuated. 12 rounds expended on shots that missed due to wind, range miscalculation, or targets moving at critical moments. His body screamed for rest. His hands shook uncontrollably. The moral weight of 7 deaths, 7 men who would never return to Germany, 7 families receiving telegrams, crushed him. But British radio intercepts that evening showed German defensive coordination faltering. Commands were delayed, counterattacks were poorly timed. The systematic elimination of officers who had directed operations with such efficiency was creating chaos in German command structure, and Thornton still had 31 rounds remaining. At Wehrmacht LX-66 Corps headquarters, 15 miles behind the front lines, Oberst Friedrich Müller reviewed casualty reports with growing disbelief. July 12th, 0800 hours, 7 officers killed in 16 hours, all by small arms fire at ranges exceeding 500 yards, not artillery, not aerial bombardment. Precision rifle fire that defied everything German intelligence understood about British sniper capabilities. "This is impossible," Müller stated flatly, spreading the reports across his desk. Hauptmann Richter, killed at 580 yards. Oberleutnant Schmidt, 620 yards. These ranges exceed British sniper doctrine. Their standard issue rifles are effective to 400 yards maximum under combat conditions. Major Hans Weber, the Corps intelligence officer, had interviewed survivors. Their accounts were consistent and disturbing. Single shots from concealed positions, Herr Oberst. No follow-up fire. The shooter relocates before our troops can respond. He's selecting officer targets specifically, ignoring easier shots at enlisted personnel to focus on command staff. One man. Witnesses describe single muzzle flashes, single impacts, either one exceptionally skilled marksman or multiple snipers coordinating with impossible precision. Müller understood battlefield mathematics intimately. Effective sniping required stable positions, clear observation, favorable conditions, and, most importantly, time to calculate ballistic solutions. British forces were attacking constantly. German defenders were responding to threats across 6-kilometer front. There was no time, no stable positions. Conditions were terrible. Yet someone was systematically eliminating German officers with cold efficiency that suggested peacetime competition shooting transplanted into combat conditions. "Countermeasures?" Müller demanded. "We've deployed 4 sniper teams to likely positions, increased officer security details, restricted daytime movement near British observation lines. But Herr Oberst, our defensive operations require officers to coordinate between positions. If they cannot move, cannot observe, cannot direct defensive fire, our entire doctrine collapses." That was the impossible equation. German defensive success depended on responsive command structure, officers observing British deployments, directing counterfire, coordinating withdrawals and counterattacks in real time. But maintaining that responsive structure now meant exposing officers to precision fire from distances German doctrine considered safe. The British shooter, whoever he was, had identified the critical vulnerability in German tactical system and was exploiting it with systematic ruthlessness. Müller lit a cigarette, drawing smoke deep into his lungs. "What's our casualty rate among company and battalion commanders?" 14% in 48 hours, Herr Oberst. If this continues, we'll have lost 50% of our command staff within a week. The implications were catastrophic. Replacing officers took time, moving reserve commanders forward, briefing them on local conditions, integrating them into units they didn't know. Each replacement meant hours of confusion, disrupted command relationships, delayed responses to British attacks. And if replacements were being killed before they could become effective, the entire defensive structure would collapse into chaos. German counter-sniper teams were redeploying frantically. Hauptmann Klaus Dietrich, one of Wehrmacht's most experienced marksmen, with 43 confirmed kills on the Eastern Front, took position in Esquay Church Tower with his scoped Carabiner 98K. From that elevated position, he could observe likely British sniper locations across 1,500 yards of frontage. German doctrine was straightforward: identify the threat, fix the target, eliminate with overwhelming firepower. At 11:45 hours on July 13th, Dietrich observed movement in a destroyed barn 600 yards northwest. Through his 6X scope, he saw a British soldier, Lance Corporal insignia, probably a reconnaissance scout. Not the sniper, but possibly related. Dietrich was about to signal infantry when he noticed the British soldiers' deliberate movements, checking firing positions, estimating ranges, evaluating sight lines. Not reconnaissance, preparation. Dietrich settled his rifle, calculated windage and elevation, and waited. If the British sniper used this position, Dietrich would have one chance: identify the muzzle flash, fire immediately, eliminate the threat before he could relocate. The waiting was excruciating. 15 minutes, 30. Dietrich's eyes burned from maintaining scope observation. Then, at 12:23 hours, he saw it, a figure moving into position in the barn's shadows, the glint of optics catching sunlight, the distinctive profile of a scoped rifle. Dietrich centered his reticle, compensated for range and wind, and squeezed his trigger. The shot impacted 6 inches left of target. The British soldier dropped instantly, but not from being hit, from recognition that he was being targeted. Before Dietrich could chamber another round, the British sniper's return fire shattered the church tower window 18 inches from Dietrich's head. The German marksman threw himself backwards as glass exploded across the tower. When he looked again, the barn was empty. Dietrich descended the tower with hands shaking. The British shooter had engaged at 600 yards through a narrow window while under direct fire and placed his shot within 18 inches of target. That wasn't luck. That was skill that exceeded anything Dietrich had encountered on either front. The pattern continued through July 14th and 15th. German officers died. 2 battalion commanders, 5 company commanders, 3 artillery observers. Radio intercepts showed British attacks were being conducted with unusual aggression because German defensive responses were delayed or poorly coordinated. Replacement officers were arriving, receiving brief orientations, and being killed before they could effectively command their units. The German command structure wasn't just damaged, it was being systematically dismantled. At evening briefing on July 15th, Müller reviewed the casualty statistics. 23 German officers killed in 6 days, all by precision rifle fire, all at ranges exceeding 550 yards. British forces had advanced 400 yards. Modest by offensive standards, catastrophic by Normandy hedgerow norms, where 50 yards constituted significant progress. "We cannot sustain this," Weber stated simply. "Officer casualties are exceeding our replacement capacity. Units are being commanded by NCOs who lack tactical training for these responsibilities. British attacks that we should be repelling are succeeding because our defensive coordination has collapsed." Müller crushed his cigarette. What is German High Command's response? They believe we're exaggerating, that one sniper cannot possibly create this level of disruption. Then they're fools. This isn't one sniper creating disruption. This is one sniper exploiting the fundamental weakness in our doctrine, that responsive defense requires exposed command staff. He's proven that our officers are vulnerable, our countermeasures are inadequate, and our entire defensive system can be paralyzed by a single man with sufficient skill and obsolete rifle. On July 16, 1944, at 16:45 hours, Sergeant William Thornton fired his final round from the Lee-Enfield No. 4 MK2. The target was an SS Hauptsturmführer directing a counterattack near Hill 112, range 647 yards, the longest successful engagement of the operation. The German officer collapsed. German defensive coordination, already fragmented, dissolved completely. British forces advanced 800 yards that afternoon, the most significant progress since D-Day. Thornton returned to British lines at 1847 hours, exhausted beyond description. 6 days of continuous operations, 50 rounds fired, 23 confirmed officer casualties. 19 additional casualties probable but unconfirmed. His hands trembled uncontrollably. His eyes were bloodshot from sustained scope observation. His body weight had dropped 9 pounds. But the mission was complete. Major Ashford met him personally at battalion headquarters. "The German defensive coordination has collapsed, Sergeant. Radio intercepts show their officers refusing to conduct daylight observations. Replacement commanders are demanding additional security that they cannot spare. Their entire responsive defense doctrine has been paralyzed." "Ooh, how many British lives saved, sir?" Impossible to calculate precisely, but when German defensive coordination functions effectively, our casualty rate averages 180 men per day. During your operation, casualties dropped to 94 per day. 6 days, approximately 500 British soldiers who would have died but didn't. The arithmetic was brutal but clear. 23 German officers killed. 500 British soldiers saved, the moral calculus of war reduced to ledger mathematics. Thornton felt no pride, no satisfaction, only exhaustion and the hollow knowledge that he'd done necessary thing that would haunt him forever. But the operational implications extended far beyond casualty statistics. The German military operated on doctrinal certainty. Their tactical systems were tested, proven superior. The idea that one enemy soldier with obsolete weapon could paralyze their defensive structure violated every assumption about modern warfare. German commanders had presumed that British sniper capabilities were limited by equipment inadequacy, that ranges beyond 500 yards provided safety, that officer casualties could be absorbed and replaced without disrupting operations. Thornton had proven every assumption catastrophically wrong. The Lee-Enfield itself became subject of intense study. Ballistics experts examined Thornton's rifle, expecting to find specialist modifications, custom ammunition, or secret enhancements. They found standard military issue, a mass-produced rifle with worn stock, basic optics, and Regulation 303 ammunition. The weapon's effectiveness hadn't come from technological superiority. It had come from shooter skill applied with methodical discipline. British sniper doctrine was revised within weeks. The emphasis shifted from equipment modernization to shooter training. Long-range precision courses were established at Bisley and other facilities. The principle was validated that battlefield effectiveness came not from having newest weaponry, but from mastering available tools with exceptional skill. American forces, initially dismissive of British obsolete rifles, began requesting cross-training. The Lee-Enfield's 10-round magazine capacity and bolt-action reliability proved advantageous in sustained operations, where semi-automatic rifles jammed or required frequent maintenance. Thornton himself was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal in October 1944. The citation was deliberately vague, mentioning exceptional courage and initiative in operations near Caen, because the specific mission remained classified for decades. He returned to combat operations, but never again as lone sniper. The psychological cost was too severe. Post-war, he returned to Blackburn, worked in textile manufacturing, rarely spoke about the war. When historians finally interviewed him in 1982, he was reluctant to discuss the operation in detail. They called it obsolete, Thornton reflected during that 1982 interview. The rifle, I mean. Officers wanted modern weapons, American equipment, specialist tools. But the rifle was just metal and wood. What mattered was understanding how to use it properly. The Germans had better weapons, better optics, better doctrine. But they made assumptions about what was possible with obsolete equipment. Those assumptions killed 23 of their officers. The Lee-Enfield No. 4 Mackay runners that Thornton used during those 6 days in July 1944 was preserved after the war. It resides today in the Imperial War Museum, displayed with simple placard. Lee-Enfield No. 4 MKY, used by Sergeant William Thornton, 2nd Battalion, Normandy, July 1944. 23 confirmed engagements at ranges exceeding 550 yards. Museum visitors, particularly military professionals, study the rifle with mixture of skepticism and respect. The weapon looks entirely ordinary: worn wood, scratched metal, basic scope. Nothing suggests the exceptional effectiveness it demonstrated in skilled hands. The broader legacy extended into post-war military philosophy. The operation validated core principles about warfare, the technology-focused doctrines often obscured, that human skill, determination, and tactical intelligence could overcome material disadvantages, that systematic targeting of enemy command structure could create disruption far exceeding individual casualty numbers, that weapons dismissed as obsolete could remain devastatingly effective when employed with exceptional competence. These principles influenced British military training for decades, emphasizing shooter development over equipment acquisition, tactical flexibility over doctrinal rigidity. For the German military, the lessons were equally profound but harder to accept. Post-war analysis revealed that officer casualty rates in Normandy exceeded Eastern Front rates by 43%. Primarily due to Allied sniper operations that German doctrine had failed to counter effectively. The assumption that responsive command required exposed officers was re-evaluated. The belief that modern weaponry automatically conveyed superiority was questioned. The recognition that enemy capabilities should never be presumed limited by equipment age became fundamental to post-war doctrine. But beyond military analysis, tactical revisions and historical study, the operation's deepest legacy resided in human dimension. William Thornton had proven that ordinary individual, equipped with tools others dismissed, could achieve extraordinary results through skill, determination, and willingness to confront impossible challenge. He demonstrated that the qualities that defined British character during darkest moments, quiet competence, understated excellence, refusal to accept that limitations were insurmountable, remained as potent as any modern weapon. 23 enemy officers, 500 Allied soldiers saved, 1 obsolete rifle, and 1 man from Blackburn who proved that assumptions about obsolescence are often more dangerous than the weapons themselves. If this story of determination against all odds resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel and help us share these incredible tales of British resilience. What other overlooked weapons or tactics from the war would you like us to explore? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your suggestions help shape our content. Thank you for watching, and remember, it's not always the newest tool that wins the day, but the skill and determination of those who wield it.